Well, there we are. Beloved, we are in Jeremiah, the book of the prophet Jeremiah. Yesterday I did a recap on chapters 1 and 2, which we'd already been through before I had to take a break from it. And those episodes, those programs of the teachings, there's several of them, uh, however many it took to cover those two chapters, are archived on the YouTube channel, so you can check them out there. We're going to begin with chapter 3, the book of the prophet Jeremiah. Today, this is still uh, it's almost the end of his first message uh, to Judah, and he's speaking in the temple court to all the higher ups because he's castigating all of them, the priests, the prophets, the princes, the king, and the people. Uh, Not just the regular people, but specifically the higher ups, the rich people, the people who have all the money and decide things. It's the same in any society. You got people who have all the money and they decide what's going to happen. And to a degree that we can snatch that liberty and that the freedom away from them for ourselves, then the better off and the more freedom we have in that society. So anyway, we'll be in chapter 3 uh, of Jeremiah, beginning in the first verse. They say, if a man put away his wife, and she go from him, and become another man's, shall he return unto her again? Well, no. According to the law, the Levitical law about divorce and remarriage says that if your wife leaves you and goes to another man, now, you know, we're used to this patriarchal society that was embedded in Rome and in English common law, to where the man made all the decisions, the woman is property, blah, 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 the patriarchy, and all of that is probably true. But Israel is the only ancient society who had some rights for women. A woman could divorce her husband if he wouldn't act like one. Uh, a woman, the women and the daughters were taught to read and write and to do basic math. They handled most of the business in many households, especially large households. And like in any other society of that time, the more well off that family was, the more likely it was that their sisters and daughters would be, and wives would be, educated to some degree, even though there was a strict separation in the temple and the worship. The Levitical law says this in Leviticus, and it reiterates it in Deuteronomy, if I remember correctly, that if a woman leaves her husband and goes with another man, and things don't work out between them, and she wants to come home, well, the Levitical law, the Mosaic law, says no, you can't do it because she's unclean. She's been with another man, and you don't want to take her back into your family. I would assume that the practical reasons for this is that she might come back with a bun in an oven, and it would mess up the bloodlines among the tribes. But there were exceptions to this rule. We saw them play out about 300 years before this, during the time of Hosea, when he was prophesying to the northern kingdom of Samaria. God told him to go marry a whore because he wanted Hosea to feel just like he felt about Israel. He says, Israel was my wife. I was her husband. I took care of her. Ezekiel says, I found you polluted in your blood. They had cast you out on the dung heap. And I looked upon you and I said, live. And I washed you and I rubbed you with oil and I swaddled you and I nursed you and I fed you and you became my wife. That's how God looked at Israel. He told Hosea to marry Gomer, who had a wandering eye. She loved the men. It's raining men, you know. Uh, you know, I don't know how to say it, but there's just some girls can't keep still. She was one of them. And like the gal in Oklahoma, what was her name? What was her name? But she said, I'm just a girl who can't say no. And and that was old Gomer. And God made him marry her, and she bore him 3 children, a daughter, and was it a daughter and 2 sons, or a son and 2 daughters? I can't remember. Haven't read it in a few days. I usually get to it at least twice a year, sometimes 3 times a year, but it just slips my mind, and I don't have the time or the patience to look back and see, although it probably wouldn't take that long. I'll just explain to you what happened, though. He told Hosea to marry Gomer, and she gives him children, and she bare to him a son and a daughter and a son. Okay, it was 2 sons and a daughter. And then she left him and went to be with another man. And then he missed her. And he goes back after her. And the Lord reiterates what he had told him. The very first words. And it says, go take thee, God tells him in chapter 1 to go take unto thee a wife of whoredoms and children of whoredoms. For the land hath committed great whoredom, departing from the Lord. In verse 3 now, God tells him to go get her again, in direct contradiction to the law of Moses. It said, if she goes off with another man and wants to come back with you, do not take her back in. She can't be your wife anymore because it's unclean. Verse 1 of chapter 3 of Hosea, then said the Lord unto me, go yet, love a woman beloved of her friend, yet an adulteress according to the love of the Lord toward the children of Israel who look to other gods. And so he goes and buys her. She is so far in debt that she's owned like a slave, a sex slave probably. And then verse 2, Hosea says, so I bought her to me for 15 pieces of silver, and for an omer of barley, and for a half omer of barley. And I said unto her, thou shalt abide for me many days, and thou shalt not play the harlot, and thou shalt not be for another man, and so will I also be for thee. What God is trying to show through Hosea and get Hosea to preach to Israel said, even though a wronged man is not supposed to take back his wife for any reason after she's been with another and been another's wife, he says, I'll take you back even though you had lovers, even though you're a slave to somebody else, I'll buy you back. I'll do whatever it takes to make you mine again, God says to Israel. And they say if a man put away his wife in Jeremiah chapter 3, and she go from him and become another man's wife, shall he return unto her again? Shall not that land be greatly polluted? But thou hast played the harlot with many lovers. Look what he says. Look what God says. He plans on destroying Judah now. He's already made up his mind. He made up his mind when Manasseh was king many years before. And he says, yet return again to me, saith the Lord. Remember, he told Jeremiah, he says, you go preach to them, but they're not going to listen. But I want you to tell them how much I love them. I want you to tell them to come back to me. God says through Jeremiah, lift up thine eyes unto the high places and see where thou hast not been lain with. The high places was where they worshiped the different gods. They would go up on mountains and sacrifice, and they would go also into the groves of trees, and the groves of trees, and they're carved out images for themselves. That's why you had the prophets of Baal, the prophets of the groves, and all of these other false gods. And God is saying there hadn't been one of them that you haven't slept with, that you haven't been unfaithful with. See, God likens fornication, spiritual adultery, going after other gods. He sees it as adultery, as spiritual fornication. Idolatry is linked to sexual sin in the eyes of God. And in the way thou hast set for them as the Arabian in the wilderness, and hast polluted the land with thy whoredoms and with thy wickedness. He's saying, Judah, that my wife that I love, that has been with other men, that I want you to come home to me. This is against the law that he gave. I want you to come back to me, be mine again, love me again. But, Judah, you sat on the side of the road like a common whore. Remember, that's how Judah went into Tamar, his daughter-in-law, because she dressed up like a whore and sat by the side of the road. And he went into her, and she conceived by him, and she bare his sons, who are the ancestors of Jesus Christ, Pharez. And it says that you acted just like a horse sitting in the road, like like you see in the movies. You see a woman of the street plying her trade, under a red light or out on a street corner. You see it now in these movies they make about the crack whores, where they're really just turning tricks for $20 or $30 a piece for the price of the next hit, the next fix. It's just awful. Just awful what's happening to our sisters and daughters. And it's awful because the men of this country have forgotten how to be men. There would be no sex trade if it wasn't for broken men who can't be men without these terrible sins against themselves and the women and God. Therefore the showers have been withholden, and there hath been no latter rain, and thou hadst a whore's forehead, and thou refusest to be ashamed. Don't judge me. I'll do what I want to do. I'm my own person. I'm free. I can do what I want to do. You can't tell me what to do. Except God can, and we can either obey or not obey. That's what he said Judah was acting like. You're acting like a whore who's not going to stop turning tricks. Leave me alone. I'm cool. Just leave me alone. Verse 4, wilt thou not from this time cry unto me, my father, thou art the guide of my youth. Won't you come back to me and let me be your guide? Remember when I pulled you up out of the muck. Remember when I delivered you from the furnace of iron in Egypt, and delivered you up out of there and brought you in a land full of milk and honey, where you lived in houses you builded not, and drank from vineyards you planted not, and ate from fields that you planted not, and drank from wells that you didn't dig. Come back to me, my wife. Come to me. Just come back to me. Call me your father. Come back to me and be my wife, and I will be a husband to you, and I'll take care of you again just like I did in the beginning. Just come back to me. Will he, God, reserve his anger forever? Will he keep it to the end? Behold, thou hast spoken and done evil things as thou couldest. Jeremiah is telling them there's no rain because you have run off from your God, your husband. You played the whore against him. There's no latter rain because you run off from your husband. There's no food in the crib because you've run off from your husband. There's no money in the purse because you've run off from your husband. There's no peace of mind because you run off from your husband. And now you're a whore because the man you ran off with dumped you. Symbolically Assyria, symbolically Egypt, which we'll get into much more through the study of Jeremiah. But you said you had a whore's forehead and you wouldn't be ashamed and you wouldn't be corrected. So, as it says here, you spoke and did evil any way you could. You see, when we're not obeying God, when we're not following God, we will seek to do evil in any way possible. We won't think it's evil, but it is. It leads to death, for the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is life eternal from Jesus Christ our Lord. And we'll be back with Jeremiah again tomorrow and for a long, long time, if I live that long. God bless you.